success of our country. We urge the youth to join us in the campaign to eradicate drug and substance abuse, which is tearing families and communities apart. Let us support affected families. Let us support law enforcement agencies to bring drug peddlers to book. Let us empower children and the youth to refuse to take drugs, and for those who are addicted to obtain assistance. Working together, let us create communities that are free of drugs and substance abuse. I thank you.
The Talk Shop.
This is the Talk Shop on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. I am Matolo, and we're talking to Chris Jacobs, conflict resolution expert at OIM, a business consultancy. We're looking at the contentious Labour Relations Amendment Bill and taking your calls on 0891 104 207 or post your thoughts on our Facebook page, SAFM Radio. Got an SMS coming in that says no political will and commitment from the public representatives that we sent to Parliament. Take your calls. Lemyas in Bushbuckridge. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome.
Hi, how are you, Marshall?
Very well, thank you, and thank you very much for staying on the line.
Yes, and you know, for starters, Marshall, I just want to say, Chris, I think I can assess that he is a biased conflict resolution expert, and I've got three issues that to raise. One is that NEDLAC on its own does not replace Parliament.
He's acknowledged that.
And NEDLAC is where these other parties, the social and the business, will meet and deal with their varying positions and try and get towards some common goal. Now we sit with a situation where a portfolio committee takes a decision because COSATU says, we don't want labor brokers. Then business says, no, we stick to the 6 months. And the portfolio committee resolved to go to 3 months. That means there was no agreement at NEDLAC.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the portfolio committee now is faced with. And then it gets to some point which it thinks it will have arrived at an amicable position which both sides will agree. But then business comes and say, no, you make a mockery. I mean, what mockery? Because there was no decision. Otherwise, this should have been something that has been clarified. And then when portfolio committee reaches this particular point, then it should have been agreed. But now they go to their polar position, and which is very problematic if one has to say. The other issue, Maschala, is you have touched it just before you brought me up, is that labor is something so-called organized labor that we're talking about. Then now, if it is organized labor, then each union has got homogeneous members because they believe in the same policy. Then you don't need to take ballot papers to them. Then because they actually talk one language, one policy, then the same way of doing things, and therefore, if there is a decision that is expected from the labor union, and then the labor union then will be actually representing its own members.
Okay.
And separate the leadership of the union with the members and say you want to ballot the members. As well, the union can demand, if the employer doesn't agree on any pay package, the union can demand that, no, we need the board members of this company, and then to go on a secret ballot. Will the business accept that?
Lemyas and Bushbuckridge, thank you very much for the call, sir. And it's a good, valid point, Chris, that Lemyas is raising, that if we are talking about how the unions, conduct themselves, one of the issues that we've looked at here on the Talk Shop is the role of the unions, and if they're putting the interests of the employees at first, of their members first and foremost. And they talk about how important it is that there be feedback that they go and they report back to the employees, and then the employees and members will tell them, no, this is not what we want. We'll take that back to the table, take that back to the negotiations. And when the members themselves, when they tell them we've reached deadlock, and the members themselves then say let's strike, they are not in a position to be saying no, you must not be striking. They follow what the members demand, and there is constant feedback and consultation. So isn't that covered in the strike ballot action that is being proposed, as mentioned by Lemius?
Definitely not. If one looks at the reality of what played out last year, we had a rejection, and it's not the first time that it's happened. We had a rejection of recognized leaders. We had in several cases, and it's not just the mining industry where this happened, a rejection of recognized unions. So that's a reality that we have to take into account. So if those processes were infallible, then that would not have happened. What we have to take into consideration is that over the years, the unions has played a major role in terms of not just preparing the groundwork in terms of democratization in South Africa, but also their own processes being democratic as well. So the unions, to a large extent, have been a very good example of how to practice democratic processes. So a democratic process in this regard, one would say, what would suit all of this? Now, we have situations, and I've mentioned that before, where constitutions of some unions make provision for strike ballots to take place. Some of the unions do not have that. That's one of the most democratic things which I can think of.
Well, Lemius says that for a conflict resolution expert, you sound like you're biased on the side of business, that you are more pro-business than you would be the workers and the issues on the table regarding the challenges that they face on a daily basis.
Definitely not. If that is the case, it's definitely not what I want to project, because in most cases, the way that I do things is to lead both business as well as unions to get through some form of agreement, which may not keep everybody happy all the time, but which is something to work with and to deal with going forward. Now, if one talks about a democratic process, and I just want to go back to that part of it, it is very clear that if you say that we are members of a union, we have a right to decisions. But what we have also seen is that in some cases, and I'm not saying all unions, in some cases last year, there was fierce intimidation. And we all know what the result was in terms of that. So in the end, and I've lived through some of those occurrences, and I've worked with unions trying to safeguard lives of very prominent shop stewards in violent situations. So being biased, well, yeah, that may be an opinion, and everybody has got a right to have their opinion.
But we just needed also to clarify that so that it's not left hanging with listeners going, but why was this not followed up? Give you a chance to respond. I want to just quickly talk about, you talk about the change that needs to happen at a union, employee and employer level. Let's go through that. What kind of change are we talking about here?
Let's start with the employer. Create a certain climate within which businesses operate. The government has that responsibility in terms of creating an investor climate, but business and business leaders have a responsibility to create the right climate right there at the workplace. Now, if this is now going to make me seem biased towards unions again, well, gracefully so. The fact is that in a lot of these cases, and it has been acknowledged to a certain extent by some of the captains of industry in the mining industry, that have fallen short tremendously in terms of creating the right climate and communicating directly and honestly, truthfully, directly with their employees. And that's a fact that we also have to take into consideration. Any trade union member has to have a job to be a member of a trade union unless I'm part of a unemployed trade union. But the fact of the matter is, I'm employed in the first place. But management has to take on the responsibility to communicate directly to the employees in a very honest and non-biased way.
I was worried there. I thought we'd lost you for a minute. The other issue that you raise is what employers need to do in the context of the new bill being approved or rejected. If it is approved, what do you advise?
Management in any way has to control that which they can control. Many of the situations that are reflected as strikes or protected or unprotected actions these days have a bearing back to the economic and socio-economic realities of our country. To a large extent, management cannot control that. What can they control? They can control that part which is within their control with regards to their relationship with the employees. And this is where you really have to have a mindset change within most of companies in South Africa, and that is away from the old legalistic industrial relations approach to a more people-centered employer relations approach. And that has not taken place. Our labor legislation in South Africa talks about, amongst other things, in the preambles of things such as the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, talks about things such as the democratization of the workplace. To a large extent, that has not taken place in business in South Africa. I lay that in front of me to say that in that regard, they have not fulfilled their responsibility to further open up the workplace in South Africa in terms of engagement, in terms of honestly talking to employees, and not just to the organized, not talking to and have discussions with the leaders of organized labor, but talking to the ordinary employee in the business.
Okay, all right. We're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time, Chris Jacobs, conflict resolution expert at OIM, a business consultancy. We were talking about the contentious Labor Relations Amendment Bill. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the criminalization of same-sex conduct in sub-Saharan Africa, and we're talking about the Amnesty International report. Whitney Brown, Amnesty International's Director of Law and Policy, joining us together with Jackson Otieno, a Kenyan human rights